Now, we actually know what we need to do, but since I come from a world where being held accountable is what I'm used to and producing results is what it's all about, I'm going to tell you what you can hold me accountable for. In the first term of the Fiorina administration, in the first couple years of the Fiorina administration, there are 6 things we must get done. And you're going to help me get them done. I call them my blueprint to take our country back. Let me start with the first one. We have to finally get around to reforming this tax code. It is 73,000 pages long. And that level of complexity benefits who? The big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected. You know, I was the chief executive of a $90 billion company. If I didn't like the tax code, I could at least hire accountants and lawyers and lobbyists. But that 9-person real estate firm that I started out in, they can't hire all those people. And that's why all this complexity of 73,000 makes the big bigger, the powerful more powerful, the wealthy take advantage of it, and meanwhile the small and the powerless and the middle class are getting crushed. Instead of 73,000 pages, we need a tax code that's 3. 3. Why 3? Because you can understand 3 pages. Now, you're going to hear a bunch of politicians tell you that it can't be done. We can't go to a 3-page tax code. Would it surprise you to learn that there has been a plan for a 3-page tax code for 20 years? You see, we don't lack for good ideas. It's just we don't get them done. Yeah, we can go to a 3-page tax code, and we must, and when we do, we can replace the IRS, because you don't need a lot of IRS agents when you have a 3-page tax code. Would it surprise you to learn that we now have more personnel in the IRS than we have in the CIA and FBI combined? That's a fact, ladies and gentlemen. That's a fact. Does that strike you as an incredible misallocation of resources in these difficult and dangerous times? We have to replace the IRS. We have to go to a 3-page tax code. But how do we fix a problem like having more IRS agents and CIA and FBI when we know we need more CIA and FBI agents? The second thing I will commit to, and you can help me get done, we have to go to zero-based budgeting. You know, zero-based budgeting is a really fancy word for how you budget at home, how every one of us budgets in our business. And you know what it means? It means every dollar has to be examined and justified. Any dollar can be cut and any dollar can be moved. We absolutely have to go there. Have you ever noticed how every year the federal government spends more money and yet it never has enough money to do the important things? We have been spending more money, as I say, for 50 years, and yet when we ask the government to secure the border, we need more money. Care for our veterans, we need more money. Answer taxpayer questions on tax day, we need more money. The only way we can spend less money overall, and yes, we must spend less money overall, quit talking about it and actually doing it so that our deficits don't continue to rise, 18 trillion in debt and counting. The only way to spend less overall and yet prioritize our spending. Put more money in caring for our veterans. Put more money so that our military is the strongest on the face of the planet and everybody knows it. The only way to do that is to be able to cut and move any dollar, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is called zero-based budgeting. It might surprise you to know that there is a bill for zero-based budgeting that's been sitting on the floor of the U.S. Congress. Hasn't gotten it voted on. You ever wonder why? Why hasn't that bill gotten voted on? Why haven't we moved to a 3-page tax code when there's been a plan lying around for 20 years? You know the answer to this, because think about how many oxes are going to get gored. When you go from 73,000 to 3 and to zero-based budgeting, it upsets every interest group. And yet it is what has to happen. I'm going to ask you to help me to get those first 2 things on my blueprint done, and here's how I'm going to ask you to help me. We know that politicians respond to pressure. When we put enough pressure on the political process, it moves. And so every week I'm going to go in the Oval Office, perhaps during the weekly radio address, and I am going to ask you to take out your smartphones. There are a lot of flip phones here in Iowa. You got to upgrade. I'm just telling you. You got to upgrade. You have a lot of time to shop around, shop carefully, but the reason it's so important is because I will say to you, do you think we should finally pass that bill for a 3-page tax code, pass that bill for a zero-based budgeting? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. There is an app for this, ladies and gentlemen. We actually can return to a citizen government, and then technology is a tool that will help us do it, and I will use that tool. Citizens, it is time to take our government and our country back. And of course, we cannot stop there. We finally must repeal Obamacare and try the one thing in health insurance that we have never tried. What have we never tried in health insurance? The free market, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a cancer survivor. We lost our younger daughter to the demons of addiction. So I know that it's important that people not be bankrupted by pre-existing conditions. I know that it's important that we invest in things like mental health and addiction prevention and treatment, and yet Obamacare isn't working. It must be repealed, and we actually have to go to the free market and return to the states the responsibility to manage high-risk pools. Fourth on my blueprint, we must restore the character of this nation. And that means we must stand for life and protect religious liberty. No one has been more outspoken on what is going on in Planned Parenthood than I have been, and I am visited every time I come to Iowa by Planned Parenthood protesters. I wear them like a badge of honor. We must restore the character of this nation and stand for life and religious liberty. Number 5. We actually have to secure the border, ladies and gentlemen. How long have we been talking about this? With all due respect to Donald Trump, he actually didn't bring this up. We talked about it in 2012, in 2008, in 2004, in 2000. We have been talking about this for 25 years. We know what it takes to secure a border. Money, manpower, technology. Mostly, apparently, it takes leadership, the kind of leadership that knows how to produce results. And we finally have to enforce a pro-American immigration system that focuses on what's good for our nation and our citizens first. And last but not least, on this blueprint of what I will be held accountable to as President of the United States, we must defeat ISIS. It is delusional, ladies and gentlemen, as a terrorist attack is ongoing, for Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton to be tweeting about gun control. It is delusional for President Obama to be standing in Paris talking about climate change. We must defeat ISIS, and to do so, we must deny them territory. We must stand up and lead in the world again, ladies and gentlemen, because when we do not lead, the world is a dangerous and a tragic place. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to wrap up here, but I said something at the beginning of my remarks. I said I'm going to ask for your support, because I believe I am the most qualified candidate to win this job and to do this job. You already know what it takes to beat Hillary Clinton. In your heart of hearts, you know I can beat her. But let's talk about what it takes to do this job at this pivotal and perilous time. I believe it takes a leader who understands how the economy actually works. And she must also understand how the world works. I have met more world leaders than anyone running, with the possible exception of Hillary Clinton, but I didn't do photo ops with them. I did business and charity and policy work with them all around the world for decades behind closed doors. I've held the highest clearances available to a civilian. I've chaired the advisory board at the CIA. I've advised the CIA, the NSA, 2 secretaries of defense, and a secretary of Homeland Security. I know the world and who is in it. And I know, since I know so many of our allies, and I have met many of our adversaries as well, that when we do not stand with our allies or confront our adversaries, the world becomes a very dangerous, tragic place. Our president needs to understand bureaucracies, because our federal government has become one giant, bloated, corrupt, inept bureaucracy. And that is what happens when you feed a bureaucracy more money each and every year where there are no goals, are no metrics, and there are no consequence for non-performance. You get ineptitude and corruption. And we cannot take our country back unless we cut our government down to size and hold it accountable. I know what that takes, ladies and gentlemen. Our president needs to understand technology. No, Mrs. Clinton, you don't wipe a server with a towel, something you've unfortunately found out. Technology is a tool, ladies and gentlemen. It is a tool I will use to re-engage the citizens of this nation in the process of the government of their nation, because ours was intended to be a citizen government. But technology is a weapon as well. It is a weapon that is being used against us, and we must fight back. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we need somebody who understands what leadership is. Leadership is about being held accountable. Leadership is not about talking a good game. Leadership is about translating goals and commitments into results and accountabilities. A leader sometimes has to make tough calls in tough times and prepared to stand up and be held to account. I've been tested. I've been held accountable all my life. I've produced results all my life. That's how you go from being a secretary to a CEO. And leadership requires one other thing. You have to be willing to challenge the status quo. We've got a lot of politicians who are fine people, but they remind me of managers. Managers don't challenge the status quo, they operate within it. They don't ever really buck the system, they're part of the system. The highest calling of a leader is to challenge the status quo. I am reminded of something one of my heroes once said. Margaret Thatcher once said to her fellow countrymen and women at a pivotal time in that nation's history, "I am not content to manage the decline of a great nation." Well, ladies and gentlemen, neither am I. Neither are you. I think we have been managing the decline of this great nation for far too long. I am prepared with your votes, with your prayers, with your support, with your press 1 for yes, 2 for no. I am prepared to lead the resurgence of this great nation. Citizens, it is time. We must take our country back. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Now, traditionally today, we had video questions mixed in with live questions, but we're going to scrap that for you. Since you've been able to hang tough with the boys club, we decided to assemble our own boys club to ask you some questions, starting with the senior economic contributor to FreedomWorks, Stephen Moore.
Hi, Carly. Great to see you. What an awesome performance, wasn't that? You know, I misspoke a little. I spoke earlier, and at the end, I just want to clarify something. Remember when I said we have to make sure she does not become president? Just to clarify, I was talking about Hillary, not Carly Fiorina. So wouldn't it be wonderful, by the way, if we had the first woman president was a pro-worker, pro-business, pro-life, pro-America woman? I mean, wouldn't that be something else? So thank you, Carly, for great. All right, So I want to ask you, if I may, I want to ask you kind of a tough question. You know, you mentioned the fact that we've heard from Republicans and Democrats for 30 years secure the border. It never seems to get done. But there's another issue that Republicans and Democrats have promised for 30 or 40 years. That is to balance the federal budget. We've heard that since Ronald Reagan and before Jimmy Carter.
We've even had balanced budget amendments, but then we just
well,
ignored them.
You just anticipated my question. So this is a two-part question. Number one, you talk about zero-based budgeting. I love that idea. And you are someone, obviously, who has experience balancing budgets as a CEO. What other steps do we need to do? You mentioned, I was going to ask you about, do you support a balanced budget amendment? What about a line item veto for the president to get rid of some of this wasteful spending like the bridge to nowhere? And then the other part of this is conservatives are still angry at Republicans for what happened in 2008 when we bailed out the banks and the insurance companies and you know, all of these more. How many of you are still angry about those bailouts? So can you make a pledge that we are not going to have more bailouts of private companies, that we're going to have free market capitalism, not crony capitalism?
Yes, I can make that promise. But let me just elaborate for a moment, because think about the time of all those bailouts. You know, we were facing financial crisis. This is so typical. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how socialism starts. Government creates a problem, and then government solves the problem. So think about the financial crisis. Who created the problem in the mortgage market? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, supported by both Republicans and Democrats. There were 25 federal agencies supposedly minding the store, right? Well, what happens? We bail out the banks. We don't ever reform Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We haven't reformed any of these 25 agencies, no. Now, and I agree, Democrats are guilty of this, but Dodd-Frank, talk about crony capitalism. What did Dodd-Frank result in? Dodd-Frank took 10 banks too big to fail, turned them into 5 even bigger, more powerful banks. By the way, those 5 helped write the bill. It also created a brand new bureaucracy, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which by statute, Congress has no oversight over. That bureaucracy is digging through hundreds of millions of credit reports right now looking for fraud. Boy, I'll tell you what, that makes me nervous. And meanwhile, 20% of the credit union industry has gone belly up. Almost 1,600 community banks have gone belly up. Why? Because the small cannot deal with big government. Crony capitalism is what happens when big government gets bigger, and then only the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected can deal with it. This has a crushing effect on our economy. And when you have 1,590 community banks going out of business, what's the impact of that? Those are the places, or credit unions, those are the places where families get their loans, where small businesses get their loans. When we are crushing the helping hand, the part of the financial system that takes a chance on our small, our new, our community-based and family-owned businesses, we're crushing the economy. Government creates a problem, government steps in to solve the problem. Dodd-Frank, Obamacare, student loan, you could go on, but it's been going on for 30 years. It's why we have to finally cut this government down to size and hold it accountable. It is crushing the potential of this nation.
Awesome. How you doing?
Asking the next question, he's asked many today, is again Congressman Rod Blum.
Thank you.
Hi, Congressman.
Carly. Good to see you, Carly. Welcome to the 1st District. Pleased to have you here. This is from Matt Ehlers, who is a truck driver for Prairie Farms in Dubuque. Matt, are you here? Right there?
Okay, I gotta ask you real quick, Matt. Do you happen to be a reader of the Tow Times? No, okay, too bad. My husband was a tow truck driver. He started out as a tow truck driver, and there's a magazine that apparently a lot of truckers read called the Tow Times, and I'm only bringing it up because my husband Frank was featured in the Tow Times. I thought maybe you'd read it. It's like his proudest interview.
His question, Carly, is this. Wages for working families are stagnant or down under President Obama's administration. What would your administration do differently to reverse this trend and put more money in the pockets of hardworking Americans?
Well, it's the question. But here's the truth, actually. Middle-class wages have been stagnant for almost 40 years. So have things gotten worse under Obama? Most definitely, yes. Will things be even worse under Hillary Clinton because she's never met a problem for which big government wasn't the solution? Yes. But the reason middle-class wages have been stagnant for so long is because we're not creating enough jobs. There's not enough competition for the labor. And the reason we're not creating enough jobs is as government gets bigger and bigger and more complicated, which is what has been going on for 40 years, sadly, under Republicans and Democrats alike. Yes, the trend accelerates under Democrats because they believe in big government. Our Republican politicians at least know it's a problem. But the reason that's been going on is because all of that weight crushes who? Yes, us. But who are the real job creators in this economy? You know, when our founding fathers talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the spark that set that tinder afire to create this nation was entrepreneurialism and innovation. And it is small, new, family-owned, community-based businesses, the entrepreneurs and the innovators in this country who have always created 2/3 of the new jobs. They employ half the people. And when we are crushing them, and we are crushing them, we're not creating enough jobs. Last year, 400,000 small businesses were formed. Wow, that's fantastic. It's a sign of great vitality, great determination on the part of the American people, but guess what? 407,000 were crushed. So when we start crushing the entrepreneurial spirit of this nation, when we make innovation harder, when we say, just let me give you an example. If you happen to be a young woman and you want to become a hairdresser, maybe you're a single mom with a couple kids, and you want to open a hairdressing salon. It's a great entrepreneurial activity for women. Maybe you want to employ yourself. Maybe someday you want to employ a couple other people. Do you know it will take you a year to get through a permitting process? And if you want to be an emergency medical technician, you can get through it in 3 months. We make it so hard for people to create jobs that we don't create enough jobs. It's why we've got to lift the weight off this economy. And if we are creating a lot of jobs, then there's competition for that middle-class labor. Now, yes, there are other issues as well. We have to provide the right kind of education. We have to make sure that we leave no one behind, including, by the way, a 50-year-old who's laid off. We need to give that person the opportunity to go back and get reskilled and retrained. So there are many things, but we must start with the basics. When we are crushing job creators, we are not creating enough jobs. And when we are not creating enough jobs, not only do we get the lowest labor participation rates in decades, but wages stagnate.
The last and final question is going to be asked by me. I've been on this stage now, up and down, for 4.5 hours, and you guys have been very patient. I've been wanting to ask this of a CEO, and this is something I think that would have been a great question for Herman Cain and maybe even Mitt Romney. The federal government is so big. None of us could really name all the agencies, cabinet level agencies, sub-agencies. There's 88 means-tested welfare programs, 9 different agencies that might settle the Syrian refugees. How would a CEO who's overseen a company as big as Hewlett Packard with subdivisions and international subsidiaries begin to push the dominoes down to bring down the size and scope of government?
So first of all, government is huge. It's unbelievably complex. In fact, it's so complex that a lot of times politicians will say, nobody but a politician can figure it out. But the truth is, most of this takes common sense and good judgment. Let me just tell you a little bit about Hewlett Packard for a moment. I said it was a $90 billion company. That's what we turned it into. We doubled its size. We quadrupled its growth rate. We tripled its rate of innovation. We quadrupled its cash flow. But it operated in 170 countries. A $90 billion business. This is as big and complicated an organization as any state government. But you have to start with the basics. And this is why I say we have to start first with changing the way the government takes in your money. The government takes too much of our money. We have to reduce the amount of money the government gets. Let's just start there. You know, I'm frankly tired of Republicans talking about revenue-neutral tax reform. Baloney. Revenue-reducing tax reform. The government needs less money. But then, of course, the government has to spend less money. And we have to have enough money on our priorities. And that's why the way you start is by knowing where the money is being spent. It's so basic. We don't know where our money is being spent. Ask yourself why. I asked you this question a moment ago, but why is it that the government spends more money each and every year and never has enough money to do the important things? You know why that is? Because all the money is spoken for. All the money is owned by all these bureaucracies. I don't know how many of you have ever done business with the federal government, but if you have, I started out when I got out of the secretarial pool, I became an entry-level salesperson at AT&T. And I sold to the federal government, and I figured out quickly what everybody who does business with the federal government figures out. If you just hang around in the last 8 weeks of the fiscal year, they're going to spend money. They're going to spend every dime they have because they have to. They never want to answer the question, why are you doing it with, perhaps you could do it with less. So we have to know where the money is being spent. Zero-based budgeting. We have to force every agency to justify every dollar. And if you have no goals and you have no metrics and you have no results, guess what? You get no money. It's sort of basic. One last thing I would say on this. You know, we have inspectors general in the U.S. government. One of the things I will do, in addition to the 6 things I just told you that you can hold me accountable for in the first couple years of my administration, I would empower those inspector generals. They are buried in agencies, and it takes a lot for their reports to get out. But most of the bad things we learn about government, we learned from an inspector general. And most of the time, inspector generals can tell us where there is real waste, real fraud, real abuse. You learned that, you know, the VA isn't serving those who've served us, but they handed out $142 million worth of bonuses, while 307,000 veterans died before they ever got health care? Really? Citizens, we cannot continue to settle for this. We are better than this. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Go Hawkeyes.